The Legend of the Return, Chapter 1, The Meeting. Jackie Davidson, this one's for you. I was out walking with O'Neill, my rambunctious young puppy, on our usual afternoon stroll. O'Neill and I loved all the groomed trails that snaked through the thickly wooded grounds. We were particularly impressed that certain paths had been dedicated to dog owners. They were called the leash-free trails. On most walking trails, dogs had to be leashed on a maximum 2-meter lead. My mother, as the local veterinarian, had lobbied for years to convince Cold Town's council to carefully select and mark a dedicated series of trails for trained dogs and their owners. I think the offer for free dog training sessions for all new dog owners was the lobbying point that finally won Mom the vote. A reflective purple collar identified graduates of the course to approaching strangers to put them at ease. Mom and Dad had a gated fence that opened up to one of the trails. Our home backed onto a wooded area perfect for such use. In my mind, dogs and trails went together like chocolate and peanut butter. On this day, O'Neill was in a hyper uncooperative mood. She kept chasing anything that moved. She would dash off into the thick woods and leave me straining to see where she was. I would call her and scold her, and she just wagged her tail, cocked her head and smiled. Her tongue wiggled out of her open mouth, drool dripped from the tip, and her lips curled upwards at the side. She paused only long enough to acknowledge that she had heard me. Then she continued after what she was chasing. I could tell she wanted to be good, but it was so hard for her in these woods. She was very young, and we had a lot of work to do on her listening skills. I honestly don't know what that squirrel was thinking when it stepped out of the woods onto the path in front of us and froze. O'Neill's eyes almost popped out of her head, and after a moment's consideration, while frozen stiff and still, she decided a chase would be fun, and off she went in a flash. I called after her, "O'Neill, you get back here," but she was gone. I called and called, "O'Neill, come!" but she did not come back. As much as I dreaded it, I was going to have to leave the ease of the groomed trail and head into the dense woods to find that darn dog. In a frustrated mood, I weaved my way through the brush, twisting and bending to get through all the branches and undergrowth. My powerful legs pushed me through the worst of it, and my long, wavy, dark blonde hair snagged on branches as I pushed through the woods. Being a bit shorter than most probably helped me in this situation, although I resented not sharing my mom's perfect height. I followed the earnest barking of my dog, believing she must have treed that foolish squirrel. I was sure I would find her standing at the bottom of a tree, barking up at the animal. It was easy to follow the ruckus, but my arms and legs were getting quite scratched moving through all the interlocking branches and limbs that blocked my way. Finally, I came upon O'Neill in an opening in the brush, but she wasn't barking up a tree as I had expected. Instead, she was standing at the open end of a huge hollow tree that lay majestically on its side. It was the remains of a very old tree. My heart tugged a little, thinking about the loss of such a historical piece of the forest. Something burrowed inside of it, and O'Neill was brave enough to bark at it, but not brave enough to go inside after it. I grabbed O'Neill by the collar and pulled her back, shushing her to no avail. I peered in, expecting to see the squirrel huddled inside the tree trunk. Instead, what glared out at me shocked me and a creepy curiosity crawled up my spine. There were two enormous adjacent lights. Eyes? They were bigger eyes than I had ever seen, the size of truck headlamps. They appeared to be tightly clustered diamond-like bundles of light. They reminded me of my mom's diamond earrings, although multiple times larger. As I peered into these lamps of light, which I now believe to be the eyes of some creature, I could see fearful emotion in them. The creature was probably harmless to me and probably harmless to O'Neill if she would just stop barking. Could something so big be harmless? What kind of animal would sport eyes this size? A bear? A bear with eyes sparkling and soft? No, I would have been an easy snack by now if it were a hungry bear. As I gazed forward with caution, I sensed no power or harm in this stare, only fear and curiosity. Kind of the same things I was feeling. With an adventurous heart, I cautiously inched forward into the mouth of the log and tried to coax the creature out. It only cowered deeper into the tree trunk. I had some dog snacks in my pocket, so I took one and I held it out to the creature. I made soft cooing sounds and inched closer to the pair of eyes. I still couldn't see anything more than its eyes. I soon realized I needed to distract O'Neill from this poor creature if I was going to come close to gaining its trust. I threw a dog treat away from the tree trunk for O'Neill, and she instantly forgot about the thing in the log and then chased after that treat. In the process, she became distracted by a butterfly and went off after it, leaving me alone in my quest to connect with the creature. I inched closer, trying to let the animal know that I was friendly. I still felt no reason to be afraid of the creature behind the massive eyes, but I'm not sure how naive that was. I held the treat in an open palm, hoping it would sniff the food and be enticed. I went as close as I dared, then stayed very still and calm. I could hear O'Neill sniffing around outside the log, so I knew I didn't have much time before her barking started again. I remained as still as a statue. Suddenly, I felt the creature move towards my hand. I focused on staying calm, using soft breaths. I heard, rather than felt, the animal sniffing the food. It hesitated then, so I cooed gently and encouraged, like you would a wee chipmunk on the forest floor. What happened next shocked me further. The animal opened its mouth to take the food, and the interior of the tree trunk lit up. The inside of the animal's mouth glowed like the coals of a fire pit. I could feel the heat coming from its mouth. I dropped the food and momentarily froze. A snake-like tongue popped out and scooped up the food like a set of fingers. I think I saw the creature in that flash, but I didn't trust what I'd seen. It had to be a mistake. I kept looking from the spot the treat had been back up to those big diamond eyes. I remained in place, certain that any sudden move would spook the creature and it would retreat deeper into the log. The creature and I didn't move. We were measuring each other up, I think, trying to decide if the situation really was safe. My trance-like state was interrupted by the frantic digging sounds of my dog just outside. I didn't want O'Neill anywhere near this creature until I understood for sure what we were facing. By scale, this thing could swallow up my dog whole. I slowly backed out of the log, shaking a bit, never taking my gaze off those eyes. I was unsure of what to do. Fear and uncertainty filled me. What was I doing here? O'Neill barked at me and I jumped a country mile. That did it. That snapped me into motion. Fear won the day, and I turned and ran through that thick brush and undergrowth as fast as my strong legs would allow me, knowing that O'Neill would follow. She couldn't resist a game of chase. O'Neill caught up to me and twisted in and out of my forward path, hampering my progress. "O'Neill! O'Neill!" I called. "Sit!" Much to my surprise, she settled into a nervous, tenuous sitting position, and I attached her leash to her bright purple collar. She must have heard the worry in my voice. We ran all the way home. I burst into the house through the back door and raced to my room, hearing my mother call for me as I passed through in a flurry. I ignored her call, shut my room door, and leaned with my back against it. Mother would kill me if she knew what I had just done out there. I was breathing hard, and I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. They entranced me like a piper entrances his cobra. Those eyes burned in my mind. What kind of animal was that? I had only glimpsed it, like in the flash of a camera. The log had lit up and I'd seen something, but it couldn't have been what I imagined. The darkness and the closeness of the log must have impaired my vision. I shook my head to clear my thinking. A cold chill ran through my body. Could my eyes have deceived me that much? I looked at O'Neill, staring sleepily at me with those big, round black eyes of hers, her tail happily wagging. Her tail was in perpetual motion. It even wagged when she slept. She was a beautiful, happy dog. She made people smile without even trying. She got up, walked over to her bed in the corner of my room, and lay down. She was none the worse for wear after what we had just witnessed. It hadn't bothered her one bit. I, on the other hand, was trembling, and my mind was spinning. I used every inch of my bedroom for multiple purposes, but primarily for storing clothes in a variety of piles with specific functions. I had given Mom strict instructions on which piles she was allowed to remove for laundry and which piles were to remain under my care. I had a desk for schoolwork, a huge dresser that also allowed me to pile things in a meaningful manner, and a closet big enough to entertain in. My bed was massive, covered in 1,000,000 fuzzy pillows and some treasured stuffed animals. My bed was never made the way Mom wanted it. I liked it to look a little bit lived in. My idea and Mom's idea of a made bed were not even close to being the same. We had a nice house. It was one of the bigger homes in our small working-class town. I was uncomfortable with the idea that we were considered rich by most of the people in town. At school, wisecracks were made behind my back about me being a snob. Most kids mistook my shyness for snootiness. To make matters worse, I was an only child, and I was kind of spoiled. I would never admit that to Mom and Dad, but I knew I could have pretty much anything I wanted if I asked for it. I didn't ask for much, though, because I knew I didn't need a lot of material things. I didn't want to flaunt our family's affluence. Just like Mom and Dad, I was more interested in animals and nature and living things. They also never flaunted our good fortune and did their utmost to live modestly and give generously. I had a hard time fitting in at school. The snobbies didn't like me because I wouldn't wear what the elite group had decided was hip for that week or month. Plus, I didn't like the way they treated other kids. Most kids just assumed I would hang around with the snobbies because of my family's good fortune. I really didn't fit anywhere. I was good at sports. especially sports that required speed, but I avoided team sports where anyone might rely on my performance for a win. For some reason, I found it really hard to trust people long enough to get close. My parents didn't understand my problem with other kids. They got along with everyone. People seemed to know them and like them, and they considered everyone a friend. Even people they had only just met at the supermarket or standing in the line at a movie theater. They would strike up a conversation with just about anyone and know their life story within 5 minutes. I suppose that made sense in their respective lines of work. At some point, almost everyone in town had contact with my mom or my dad. My mom was the owner-operator of the only veterinarian clinic in town, and my dad was a well-respected family doctor. They both loved people. By contrast, I hadn't figured out how to feel comfortable with most people. I was most comfortable with O'Neill and other dogs and cats. They were so much easier to understand and to please. Annabelle, are you there? Called my mom. Mom was a beautiful woman with the biggest heart. She was tall and slender, and her hair was much blonder and wavier than mine. She had steely blue eyes common to the Kingsley side of the family. She was athletic and had a strong body, but she preferred to play team sports like softball and volleyball. These days, Dad and her were busy in their off time beating all their couple friends at pickleball down at the local courts. I shared a lot of my mom's features, including the deep blue eyes. I got my height from my dad's side. His mom was such a wee woman and gave the best hugs way down low on the waist. Shaking my head as Mom's voice pulled me from my deep thoughts, I got up and walked down the hall to the kitchen. I've been calling you to supper for 5 minutes. I was just about to come and look for you under one of those piles of clothes you made, she said, shaking her head. I stammered an apology and made my way to our dining room. Sitting there ready to eat, eyeing the big steaming plate of spaghetti, was my father. He was a handsome man, even from my perspective. Kids at school said he had movie star looks with his salt and pepper hair, dark eyes, defined cheekbones, and a straight nose. He worked out a lot and had a trim body. His smile lit up the room. The girls at school embarrassed me all the time talking about how handsome he was. Whatever. To me, he was just Dad. And right now, he was eyeing my favorite meal with too much enthusiasm. I sat down and started to dig in, not waiting for my mother to sit down. She pottered and fussed and found a million reasons to keep milling about the kitchen as Dad and I ate our meals. She often ended up eating alone long after Dad and I left the table. Maybe she did that on purpose for some alone time. I had no idea, but it annoyed me. I glanced beside my plate, and there, as usual, lay my section of the newspaper. I liked to read the comics section at supper, while Dad read the front section. I added more sauce to my spaghetti and continued to eat, feeling very hungry in spite of all the nervous upset earlier in the day. I guess sprinting about 3 kilometers had built up an appetite. Right on cue, O'Neill appeared, taking her familiar place at my father's feet. That dog knew my dad would feed her under the table, even though it upset Mom. But something was different tonight. O'Neill ignored the piece of bread Dad dropped between his feet. She was staring at me intently and seemed nervous. Something was distracting her from Dad's food offerings. I was still feeling the shock of what I had seen in the woods, And O'Neill was always acutely aware of my feelings. She kept staring at me, perhaps tuned into my tension. "Can you pass the pepper?" asked Dad. "What? Huh?" "Annabelle, can you pass the pepper?" he asked again. Yeah, sure." I passed my father the pepper, and he thanked me. As he did, he and my mother exchanged a look. He commented on how flushed I was, then leaned over to me and felt my forehead before I had a chance to lean out of his reach. He commented that I wasn't warm, just clammy. Of course I was clammy. I had just run a marathon through the woods like a scared rabbit. I leaned away from his touch, angry that he was in my space without asking permission. He knew I hated that. I hated it even more now that all the girls had started talking about my father like he was a hunk. Diagnosing our health was not unusual. One time, Dad decided I looked far too pale and suggested I was acting lethargic. He got his medical kit out to draw blood for me to take to the lab. I explained that the reason I was so tired and pale was because I'd been up all the previous night studying for a stupid English test. I hated English class because I never interpreted books the way the teacher did. I had read most of the required reading list long before my peers, but I never scored good grades in that class. That meant extra study time for me on test nights. As usual, Mom had to intervene to save me from Dad's probing by insisting I go to bed super early that night to make up for the lost sleep from test night. Sometimes having a doctor for a parent could be a real pain. After dinner was done and the dishes were loaded into the dishwasher, we all sat down in the den with the news playing on the television. Both my parents frequently shouted at the TV during certain stories, and it made me chuckle at them. They were very passionate people. As we settled into our designated spots, I realized I'd become even more nervous, and I couldn't concentrate on anything. All that was in my mind were those big, bright eyes and that long forked tongue. Suddenly, the story on the news channel drew all of my attention. "This is Andy Porchuk reporting live from the north side of town, where eyewitnesses reported seeing a large flying creature with a wingspan of over 15 meters. We have reason to believe that it landed in these very woods behind me. The eyewitnesses I spoke to today are suggesting that what they saw looked very much like a pterodactyl from the Mesozoic era, even though those creatures are thought by many to be long extinct. Experts are not so quick to support this conclusion." Oh my gosh. I hadn't imagined it then. It was real. I couldn't have imagined the whole thing because other people had seen this creature and they had seen it flying for gosh sakes. Could it be real? Was the creature I had just fed dog treats to? Was it a dragon? It made sense. Big glassy eyes, hot glowing breath, snake-like tongue, and now flight. It all added up, but it was crazy, wasn't it? The camera flashed a picture of the entryway to the trails that O'Neill and I had just returned from. A team of animal control volunteers entered these woods just minutes ago, trying to track down the reported winged animal. Local zoo officials believe they are likely to find a rare species of hawk that has been known to nest in this area. There have not been any sightings of those birds in nearly 40 years. Exaggerated estimates of the wingspan could be a result of the unnaturally large size of those rare birds when compared to our local inhabitants. What will they come up with next? My dad frowned, shaking his head. People sure can turn a molehill into a mountain in no time, can't they? Mother, did anyone call you today about this bird they think they discovered over in the North Woodland? he asked. Heavens, no, declared my mom, leaning toward the TV screen with more interest. Her head had been buried in a book up to that point. My own head was spinning. I must have made a moaning sound of some sort. Dad turned my way and gave me a grave look. He exchanged glances with Mum again. I had to act, and I had to act now. You know, Dad, I think I overdid it a bit today. O'Neill and I were tearing around in those woods, and she took off chasing a squirrel. We were in there pretty deep. I was chasing after that darn dog for so long, I ended up running the whole way home so I wouldn't be late for supper. I'm overheated and way out of shape. I better start working out again. I think I'm going to head to my room, lie down and read. Did you need anything, honey? My dad asked. He started to get up. Does your stomach feel funny? You're so pale all of a sudden. No, Dad. I think I'm just tired, that's all, I said, letting anger creep into my tone. I motioned for him to stay seated. Dad was always in diagnostic mood. You couldn't get a sliver in our house without him building it into a case for major surgery. I think I'll go to bed early and get up with you to start jogging again. Mum stepped in just when I needed her. Bill, I think she's okay. Annabelle, honey, if you need us or you start feeling worse, just yell. Your dad is going to work out for a bit, right, Bill? I'm just going into the den to work on my fundraising campaign for rehoming surrendered pets. You go lay down and see how you feel. I brought home a new book from the book exchange today. It's over on the entryway desk. The Barbara Bartley series has a new edition. It looks pretty good. The Barbara Bartley series was an adventure mystery series that I had started on 2 years ago on my 12th birthday because Mum had started the series on her 12th birthday. The stories were a bit lame, but I did enjoy them for a quick fix for my reading addiction. Okay, Mum, thanks. Good night, you guys, I said as I left the room. I scurried down the hallway, scooped up the new book on the way by, and stopped at the kitchen pantry to grab a handful of dog treats to stuff in both my pockets. I continued to my room, with O'Neill twisting in and out of my feet. That dog was such a pain when you were in a hurry. Once inside my room, I fluttered about arranging my bed to make it look as though there was a body buried deep under the covers. I opened the book and placed it on top of the covers. I stepped back to admire my handiwork and heard footsteps coming up the hallway. In a flash, I threw myself on top of my fake person, grabbed the book, and did my best to look like I was deeply engaged in the latest adventures of Sally Newbury, Barbara Bartley's teenage heroine. There was a light knock at the door, and it cracked open just a bit as my dad spoke softly. Annabelle, I brought some antacids for your upset stomach. He had obviously not heard me when I told him that my stomach was fine. Ugh, he never listens. Rather than get into it with him, I just took the tablets from his hand, smiled sweetly, and faked a huge yawn. He touched my forehead one more time, grimaced, and turned to leave. Now, honey, your mom and I are just downstairs, so if you need anything, just holler, okay? Okay, Dad, stop fussing, will ya? I'm fine. All right, I know, honey pumpkin, but a dad has a right to fuss once in a while, doesn't he? He smiled sweetly as he slid out the bedroom door. I listened intently for his fading footsteps and waited until he was gone. I reassembled the fake blanket person, realigned the book on top of the covers, and hunted for O'Neill. She had fallen asleep under my bed. O'Neill was famous for falling asleep when you wanted her awake, then terrorizing the crap out of you when you wanted her sleeping. I really didn't want to have to take O'Neill with me on my excursion, but I didn't think leaving her here would work either. If she woke up and I was not in my room, she would whine endlessly. That would draw attention that I didn't want. I poked at her to wake her, which she did not seem pleased about, then grabbed her leash from my closet floor. We didn't use the leash much because we had a huge backyard that was completely fenced in, and we were on the cusp of those gorgeous leash-free trails. However, I believed it was necessary to have O'Neill under control if I was going to accomplish what I hoped to do. I opened the window of my bedroom and put my desk chair under the window ledge. My bedroom was the only one on the main floor. I had come to appreciate that when I realized it wasn't a very big leap from my ledge to the ground. I stepped up on the chair with O'Neill in my arms and maneuvered my way out the window. O'Neill wiggled out of my arms as soon as my feet hit the ground, and I lost my balance and fell. The dog treats I had stuffed in my pocket poured out around me as I did a complete somersault over O'Neill, doing my best not to land on her. Naturally, she believed this was playtime, so she was going nuts, greedily scooping up as many treats as she could. I gathered up the treats O'Neill hadn't swallowed, snapping stern warnings at the crazy out-of-control dog, and stealthily crept to the back gate. The den and gym were both in the front of the house on the basement level, so I didn't worry that I was going to be spotted. Once on the other side of the gate, I snapped O'Neill's leash to her collar, and we sprinted off to the walking trails. There were definite signs that our normally peaceful and quiet woods had experienced some abnormal flow of traffic. There were signs of people everywhere. I hoped there was no one still out there to disturb my mission. It was harder to find my way back to the hollow log than I thought it would be. O'Neill was tugging and struggling against her leash the whole time. She was a bit confused about not being able to run when she wanted to run, but I couldn't risk her scaring off my prey or getting lost. The last of daylight was fading when I finally saw the opening to the giant log in the brush. I was sweating and tired already, but that didn't sway me one bit from my plan. I tied O'Neill to a tree a few feet away from the log. I gave her a pile of sticks to chew and a small amount of dog treats to keep her occupied. As I approached the log, I was anxious that maybe the creature was no longer in there. Maybe the people had scared it off, or worse yet, captured it. Gosh, I sure hoped it was still there. I don't know why, but I felt so connected to this animal. I couldn't explain it. I just knew I had to try one more time to gain the animal's trust. I looked back at O'Neill to make sure she was secure, and she was lunging forward on her lead with all her might, trying to reach more treats. When she ate the first few, her nose must have pushed several of the treats out of her grasp. Her lead was coming loose from all her tugging. As I stared back at her and started towards her to tighten her line, I tripped on a low branch and landed hard on the rough forest floor. O'Neill twisted violently and came loose from her collar, running to my rescue. She covered my face and licks with lightning speed. I sprang up as quickly as I could to grab her before she scooted out of my reach. She angled away at the last minute, and the chase began. It took several attempts before I finally got her into my arms and settled down. I tied O'Neill back up, tightening her collar, and I could tell she was getting tired and wanted to go home. She wouldn't stop whining and clawing at me to pick her up. I tried to soothe her by giving her some more treats and softly patted her head. Goodness knows O'Neill could be stubborn when she made up her mind about something. She eventually took the treats and made herself comfortable as she watched me slowly make my way back to the log, her head cocked to one side. That dog had a million expressions, and to me, she seemed more like a person than an animal. I felt in my pocket for some treats to offer the creature and realized there were hardly any left. I hoped this meager amount would be enough. I glanced at my phone and it was almost 11 o'clock. No wonder O'Neill was tired. I had to get this mission back on track. No more distractions or excuses. I made my way to the end of the log and leaned forward to look in. I didn't see anything. There was total darkness. Obviously, something was in there. Otherwise, there would have been some moonlight shining through from the other end. I tried cooing and holding out the food. Nothing. I wondered if the creature had fallen asleep. I didn't like the idea of waking it because I know how grumpy I could be when suddenly awakened. I turned on the flashlight on my cell phone to shine it into the log, but it didn't reveal much of anything. I tried talking a little louder. Nothing. I glanced at O'Neill, and she was fast asleep. I wanted her awake to warn me of approaching strangers. I whistled the melody that was O'Neill's special tune. As predicted, this brought her awake, head cocked to one side once again. Just as I saw my dog tilt her head, I heard a deep rumble come from within the log. I recoiled. Was that the creature? I strained to listen. It was quiet again. I waited a second, then crept back to look in the log one more time. "Hello, little one," said a low, gravelly voice.